just get a thumbs up or something in the chat that you all can see my presentation? Cannot see it yet. Thank you. Okay, I think I've successfully shared it. And so we will begin. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is our Charter Schools Facilities Fund webinar for fiscal year 22. My name is Nate Parker. I'm the Senior Director of Choice, and I'll be walking us through all things facilities funds for this cycle. And hopefully at the end of this presentation, you will feel well equipped to submit both your per pupil allocation budget into ePlan, and then if you choose, an additional competitive application into ePlan as well. As with all the work we do at the department, we like to ground ourselves in our Best for All mission that we will set all students on a path to success and here in the state of Tennessee. And you know, I come from charter schools. I worked in charter schools for over a decade and understand and appreciate the important work that you all are doing, providing excellent choice schools for our Tennessee families. And this grant is one that I'm really excited about because you can't teach kids without a building to put them in. So we are excited to provide additional supports and funding to make sure that all of our students have an excellent facility in which they can learn. Our agenda for today, which I briefly went over in the beginning, is one, to just overview the fiscal year 22 Charter Facilities Fund in both of its components, a per pupil allocation, as well as an optional competitive grant process as well. Once we kind of go over the different parts of the grant, then I'll briefly cover what the application review process will look like. Then we'll stop, have an opportunity to reflect, ask questions, submit a survey if you're going to check out after that. The second part of our meeting today will be an ePlan walkthrough, and I'll go through each step about how you will actually submit your applications into ePlan. So if you're new to ePlan, you haven't done it before, this will be a really good opportunity for you to understand exactly what you need to do. If you have done ePlan before, but you want a refresher, it's helpful for that. But it's also something that if you know 90 minutes is too much for you to dedicate to this today, know that it will be recorded and available for you to access later on when maybe you're sitting down and getting ready to work on your application. So to start, if you can please, in the chat box, submit a response to these two questions, and you can do it as one answer. But the first thing I want to know is your school considering submitting a budget for just the per pupil allocation, or are you also considering doing a competitive grant application? So for that question, you're just going to submit either PPA or both if you think you're going to submit a competitive application. And then in addition, rate yourself on your comfort and knowledge with the ePlan system. So if you are like, hey, Nate, what is ePlan? You're probably a 1. But if you feel like you could actually lead our walkthrough session at the end because you've done it, you've been doing it for a while, and feel really confident, then you give yourself a 5. And you can kind of self-assess any number in between there. How comfortable do you feel today, before this webinar, with completing your budget in ePlan? I see a lot of both, almost all both, which is great. We have a large pool of money this year to award, so we're really excited about being able to provide that for you all. And see mostly 3s and ups, some that are below that. For any of you who've been, who worked on the gear applications, or you worked CSP application, it's the same process. It's new this year that we're doing all of our facilities funds, including the per pupil allocation through ePlan. So I'm glad to see that mostly folks are 3 on up, but also know that if you do need assistance as you're completing this task over the next couple of weeks, that you can email me and I can answer questions or set up a time to help support you as needed. But definitely good to see that most of you at this point feel confident in submitting what you need to submit. Okay. So before we jump into the specific details of the grant, I just want to ground ourselves in what we're talking about here specifically, which is the Charter School Facilities Fund. The Charter School Facilities Fund is found in state statute listed there. And the purpose of this fund is to assist schools in acquiring and improving property to educate their students. And the statute provides us 4 major buckets by which we're able to award funds, and they are the purchase of property, general capital improvements, assistance with any costs associated with a purchase or lease of underutilized or vacant properties, which is also described in statute, and then also repayment of debt incurred for existing capital outlay projects. So this is where what we use as the foundation for our application process, the guidance, as well as the allowable use of funds is all found here in statute. And so specifically for fiscal year 22, this was a unique situation. In prior years, we had awarded typically around $6 million each year for facilities funds. But with COVID, as we know, it disrupted a lot of our regular procedures. And so in fiscal year 21, there was no facilities grant awarded. And so part of the way that our governor and legislature addressed that gap and then ongoing needs for charter schools was to basically reauthorize the charter school facilities grant. Fiscal year 22, they infused a larger fund than usual, which was a total of $24 million in facilities funds for fiscal year 22. And then here on after, it will be $6 million each year that will be made available. And so the per pupil allocations come out of that total pool of funds for this year, that 24 million. We decided to allocate 6 million in per pupil allocations so that every school that's currently in operation would get some additional funds available to them to support with facilities related costs. And those allocations are already uploaded in ePlan. So if you haven't had a chance to look, if you log into your school's account in ePlan and you go to your funding applications and you click on the fiscal year 22 link, you'll notice that there is an allocation already in place for your school. Do not be alarmed that the competitive allocation says 0. That will continue to say 0 until you are awarded an additional competitive grant, in which case we'll update that later on. For your per pupil allocations, even though these are already guaranteed to you, they're in ePlan, you have the allocation, we're asking that you submit the budget for those for approval by May 20th. Our hope is that most schools will be able to draw down reimbursements for their costs from this year in this fiscal year, but you certainly are not required to. We're allowing you to carry over those funds into next year, knowing that this release date was much later than we originally intended. So to access your per pupil allocations, for those of you who maybe have not gone on there yet or are newer to this, you'll want to go onto our ePlan website, which is linked there. You'll log in using your SSO account, your single sign-on, and then follow the procedures that I'll show you on the future slides. But also something that you want to check if you haven't already is just to make sure that you have a current person listed as your facilities grant director. And so you can do this by clicking on the address book, which is a link on the left side of ePlan in the light blue menu. When you click on address book, it will list everyone in your school or your organization who's been listed as having user access. And so this is something that you'll definitely want to check just annually for yourselves as a school. But before you get into the weeds here of submitting your application, make sure that you have a current facilities grant director who is still employed at your school, as well as an LEA fiscal representative and an LEA authorized representative. You'll need someone in each of those categories to submit and approve your process before it can be submitted to the department for review. So you can just check on address book to make sure that it is updated. If you've noticed that there is that's one is missing, or maybe there was someone who was your LA fiscal rep and they've since moved on and you have a new CFO or new operations manager that you would like to fill that role, then all you need to do is complete a user access form for ePlan. It is linked here, but it's also on the home page of ePlan. And then you'll follow directions on the top of that form and submit it to the email listed here, eplan.help@tn.gov. They are very responsive. So typically when you submit a user access form, you'll get a response usually within 24 hours, but rarely does it take more than 2, maybe 3 days for them to make those updates. The form does ask you to CC, I believe, me on it, which I always recommend when you're doing anything for a charter school grant to CC me on those user access forms, just so if there is an issue that I can just simply reply and help out if I can. So this is what the form looks like. So again, there's directions at the top that tell you where to email it. You will enter in the new user's name, or maybe it's a current user that you just want to add a role for. You'll list the charter school's name and their individual ID numbers, and then make sure that right there, what you see in that orange box, the charter school's facilities director is assigned to someone. They will be the primary person who will be able to edit and submit that application. The other crucial roles are in that right box underneath fiscal view and approve roles. That includes the fiscal representative and the authorized representative. Those are the other two folks that you need to approve any funding application in ePlan. One note, because I get this question with relative frequency when people ask, what is my charter school number? The easiest way to look for this if you're not sure is on ePlan. So if you look at the top where your name is listed, after that, there will be a parentheses with a letter C and a letter S and an underscore, 3 numbers, underscore 4 numbers. That CS stands for charter school. The middle 3 digits are your LEA, your district's number, and then the final 4 digits are your individual school number. So they need that both the LEA number and the school number in order to look you up and add user access in ePlan. So once you have logged on, you've made sure that everyone has the access that they need, then you'll be ready to go to start working on your application, your budget, and ePlan for the per pupil allocations. So as I mentioned before, we specifically requested, given the late release of the funds, that schools could go back and claim any reimbursements from the very beginning of this fiscal year. So you can claim reimbursements for any facility-related costs from July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. So hopefully that will make it easier for everyone to be able to quickly get their reimbursed for their facilities funds for their per pupil allocation. However, like I said, if you need to roll it over into next year, you can. We are allowing schools to roll over the fiscal year 22 per pupil allocation once into fiscal year 23. So make sure that if you are rolling it over, that you have a clear plan for what you are going to use it on and spend those funds down by the end of next fiscal year. And I know a lot of you are already familiar with the reimbursement process, but just as you are getting ready to determine what you are going to get reimbursed for in your budget, make sure that you have all necessary documentation for that. So if you are planning on being reimbursed for mortgage payments or maybe lease payments for your building from this year, then you would need to provide documentation such as your lease agreement, and then whatever invoices you have for the months that you are going to get reimbursed for. That would be your documentation to prove that the cost was incurred. And then finally, you need proof of payment. So whatever that looks like for you, if it's a bank statement, probably not an actual receipt, but something that proves that you paid those months' leases or mortgages. Upload all of that into ePlan once your budget is approved. And that is what is required to review and approve all per pupil allocation reimbursements. So I'm going to stop here. I know I went over a lot of information, how to access ePlan, kind of generally what we see most folks using per pupil allocations for. But what questions do you all have at this point about the per pupil allocations, or just general facilities grants questions?
What is it?
What is the turnaround time for budget approval? So for the per pupil allocation, my hope is to turn those around at their. I will most likely be reviewing them on an ongoing basis for the PPA. But anything that's submitted on the 20th, along with the other budgets, the turnaround time for those for the PPA budgets will hopefully be about 2 weeks. And for the competitive applications, that process will take about 3 weeks for us to probably review each of those. So our goal is that everyone will be able to submit a reimbursement request this fiscal year to avoid having to roll over funds if they want to. The PPA budgets are a little easier to review than the applications, obviously. So those I can review faster than the full applications. For schools opening in the fall, the fall 2022, do you get a per pupil amount? The answer is no. So for per pupil allocations, they are based on schools currently in operation. So you must have students enrolled in the current fiscal year, school year 21 to 22, for a per pupil allocation. Folks who are opening in the fall, while you do not get a per pupil allocation this school year, you are eligible to apply for a competitive grant, which I'll touch base here in a little bit. So you do have an opportunity still to acquire funds. You just don't get a per pupil allocation because you have zero enrollment at this point, and that's how we determined what your allocations were. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving, and there will be plenty of opportunities to ask questions as we go. But thank you so much for those questions to begin with. So as far as the competitive application process, this requires additional steps beyond just submitting a budget, like the per pupil allocation. Again, you do not have to submit a competitive grant application. You can just submit your budget for the per pupil allocation and be good to go. But should you decide that your school's interested in applying for additional competitive funding, there is a application that I emailed out earlier this week. It is also located in the calendar invite for this webinar, and it is also now currently posted on our website. So if you go to the Charter Schools grant page, this is an old image, but it's now the first bullet at the top of the page, and you can download the application itself there. The other application materials that you need, such as the assurances and the budget template for the competitive grant, are all in ePlan, so you can actually just download them from ePlan itself. But the application is on the website or in the email. So $6 million from that total $24 million was set aside for per pupil allocations. The remaining $18 million is set aside for the competitive grant funds. Part of the reason for such a large amount is because we increased the amount that an individual applicant can ask for. So they can ask for up to $500,000. Again, the reason that we wanted to make this available is because construction projects can require a lot larger allocations. And so we wanted to be intentional about hopefully supporting some of our schools who are looking to purchase or build buildings or who have a lot of repairs that they need to make. And so we wanted to increase that amount to $500,000, up to $500,000. This would be in addition to your per pupil allocation. So if you have a per pupil allocation, the competitive funds would be in addition to that fund. Each individual charter school can also apply. So I know in years past, there might have been some restrictions about CMOs and how many applications they could submit, but it's the way it's written for this one. Any school can submit an application in ePlan. So if you're a standalone school, you can submit up to one competitive application. If you're a CMO, each of your schools can submit one additional competitive application. There are two types of competitive grants, which I'll explain more in detail, but there's the high quality charter expansion grant and then the need-based facilities grant. Someone asked, can you review where to see your per pupil allocation? Yes, I will cover that here in the ePlan walkthrough. But if you go onto your funding applications page, there is a section called allocations. And then underneath it, there's two links, and one of them is also called allocations. And if you click on allocations, then it will bring up your both of the allocations. Your per pupil should have an amount greater than 0 if you are currently in operation. Your competitive allocation at this point will say $0. Also, oh, someone already answered that question. Thank you, Angie. Okay, So the first competitive grant application type is the high quality charter expansion grant. So to be eligible to apply for this one, you must be a sponsor of a new charter school that has been approved but is not yet open. So schools opening in the fall, or if you have been approved but you might be opening in a year or two from now, you would all be eligible to apply for this grant. So if you are currently in operation, you currently have students enrolled, you would not qualify to start for this grant because you already exist, you're already in operation. So this is meant for new schools who are getting ready to open. Unless you are an operator of an existing school that is increasing its school size. So if you are adding grade levels and thus you need a larger building, or you had a larger enrollment approved as part of a charter agreement amendment, and so again, you need additional facilities for the large enrollment that you are taking on, then you would qualify. But what this would not be for schools that are doing a slow growth model. So if you opened K1 and you're adding a grade every year, that would not qualify. It's only if your whatever is your charter application, what you originally submitted, if you're adding enrollment or adding grade levels onto your original charter application, would you qualify for this grant in particular? So it's really about high quality schools that are expanding, whether it's making their current schools larger or opening new schools to expand those high quality seats. That is what this particular grant is intended to support. So applicants should be able to provide a clear record of driving student achievement and outcomes. The second option is the need-based facility grant. So if you don't fit into the first bucket, then you would fit into this second bucket, which is basically it's awarded to charter schools with demonstrable unmet facility needs that are in some way impacting their student learning environment. So this would be for charter schools that are currently open and providing instruction to students, and they have unmet facility needs that they need addressed. And so you could apply for this one, and then obviously make the case for how much you're requesting and why you need that. A question came in, can a new school apply later if they are approved after the deadline and then starting a planning year during 22-23? The answer, I think you're asking is if you're like currently in the application process or if you're going to be applying next year. And the answer is no, not for the fiscal year 22 process. So you have to be approved for this school year. You should already have been approved at this point to apply for this grant. If you are in the process and you get approved this summer, then you would just want to look forward to future facility grant application periods to apply for those new schools. However, if you have a school that has already been approved that just hasn't opened yet, then you could apply. Okay. So we kind of already talked about this, but just to clarify, to be eligible, all awards are reimbursement based. So like all of our grants, you are requesting the funds through this process, but then you receive the funds after you submit a reimbursement request in ePlan with the necessary documentation. So that documentation for the competitive grant funds, just like with the per pupil, is that some sort of proof of work or proof of the facility's lease, along with a proof of payment is required for those reimbursements. And we do this through our ePlan system, which I think most of you are familiar with, but you will upload your invoices, your proof of work into the ePlan system, as well as your proof of payment, and then potentially any other documents that we request. So you've all done this before where I might kick back a reimbursement and I ask for additional information. So to be reimbursed, you just need to make sure that you're uploading at a minimum the proof of the work and then the proof of the payment. And then if anything's additional, I'll let you know. So now I want to switch to the application itself. If you haven't had a chance to review it, it is attached to this invite, so you can open it up and follow along. But there are kind of 5 sections that I want to overview. There, I skipped ahead. I'm sorry. Let me backtrack. So in terms of the purpose of funds, the purpose of these funds, as we described before, is outlined in statute, what we are able to actually reimburse for. And so here, number 1 is the purchase of property. That includes real property upon which to build the school facilities, so land. permanent school facilities themselves, but also could be relocatable school facilities. So a portable building that you purchase could also fall under this first category of allowable use of funds. The second one is you can use funds to be used for any costs associated with the lease or the purchase of underutilized or vacant property. There's a whole section in TCA about this, but you can use these funds for that. Third, allowable funds can be used for lease or mortgage payments. Fourth, funds can be used for the service of debt incurred for existing capital outlay projects. And then finally, five, funds may be used for the reimbursement of renovations in future capital outlay projects. So those are the five categories that your use of funds should fall into. And the application provides all this information, but it outlines what qualifies as a capital outlay project. So there's two requirements for your capital outlay project to be eligible. So first, the charter school must meet one of these four categories. So you either need to own the facility, be in the process of purchasing the facility, have a long-term lease for the facility, or an MOU with the authorizer for the building in which you want to do a capital outlay project within. So you would need to provide evidence of the MOU to qualify. The second category is that the facilities, whatever work that you're doing on the facilities, should be necessary to ensure the health and or safety of all your students, or an academic environment conducive to learning. So I think most of you can, that's a pretty simple thing to argue about your use of funds, but make sure that any capital outlay project that you're wanting to fund would meet both of these criteria. Now I want to get into the sections of the application. So there are five application parts. There's the cover page, the signed assurances, a project narrative, as well as an ePlan budget and budget narrative, and then appendices. And I'll go through each of these sections in more detail. So the application cover page, it exists in two forms. So I just want to flag both of these for you. So the first is just the literal cover page of the assurance document. It is something that you've seen before. You'll just want to make sure to fill out that in completion. And then the second is what's called the cover page in ePlan. And I do want to flag this one because this one gets missed a lot. This was something that I know some of you had your gear grants kicked back because you didn't fill out the cover plan in ePlan. So I want to make sure that you understand that both of these needs to be completed to fulfill the cover page requirement. So here's a picture of what they look like. The image on the left is the front page of the assurance document. And again, this is the one that you're used to seeing, that you enter in all that information for your school. The one on the right exists in ePlan. So you'll look for the link that says cover page, and when you click on it, you'll just complete this information. It's a lot of the same information that you find on the other cover page. But do go ahead and make sure you're filling out all of those completely to meet this requirement. The next is the signed assurances. So like all grants, there's make sure you read through the assurances carefully. You fill out and sign your portion on page 13, and then just go ahead and upload that, preferably as a PDF, into ePlan. You only need to complete the assurances once. So if you're applying for both, the assurances cover both the per pupil allocation as well as your competitive grant. You still need to complete the assurances even if you're only going to use your per pupil allocation. So you can download the assurances from ePlan. And again, if you're sticking around for the second half, I show where to find that. But when you click on the general related documents section, you'll pull up what you see right here. And this section is where you're going to find a link to download the assurances. And then there should be a link on the right. It's not showing here because this is when I was running a test in ePlan. But then you'll just click on the link to the right and re-upload your signed version of the assurances. And this is the assurance document. It's that cover page you saw on the left, then about 10 or 11 pages of the assurances listed there in the middle. And the very right page is the part that you need to complete, fill out, and sign to be completed. The third part of the application is the project narrative. So there's a budget narrative and there's a project narrative. You have a total of 10 pages for both. And what we say here is there's no template provided, so you can format it however you want. And we ask you to up to 8 pages to focus on the project narrative questions. That's part 1 and part 2 in the application. Part 1 are the questions that everyone answers, regardless if you're doing the high quality expansion grant option or the need-based. So there's a few questions there that you answer. Then part 2 are the grant specific questions. So you'll just want to make sure that you're answering the correct questions for the grant pool of money that you're asking to pull from. And though answering all those questions creates your project narrative. So again, we ask for about no more than 8 pages on that section. In addition, you have 2 additional pages you can have for your budget narrative. And so here you can list any specific sub-costs that you want to break down or explain for us. You can list out your expected timeline, the components that you feel are subject to variance, depending on expected costs or timeline issues. And then finally, any contingency plans that you want to explain how you will ensure a successful use of all the funds by the given timeline. And so all of that can be included in one narrative document that you submit. These don't need to be submitted separately. In addition, there's a budget template that's an Excel document that you download in ePlan. The reason for this extra step is because we cannot allow you to submit a budget in ePlan until you have an allocation, and you don't get an allocation until after you've received the grant. So that's I apologize for the additional hassle of having to upload this Excel document, but when you download that, it is an Excel document that has all the account numbers and line item numbers that you are able to use as you budget your requested grant funds. And so you'll just complete that and upload that into ePlan as part of this section as well. Here's what that looks like. And this is the section that's titled Related Documents for your competitive grant. So there's no document template listed for the narrative document because you're just going to upload however you want to format that. But there is a link next to the budget template because you do want to use the one that we provide. Once you have completed those, then there is that link that says Upload New. That is where you'll submit your completed charter school facility budget template, as well as the one above that is where you'll submit your project narrative, that PDF document. And finally, the last section is here, the appendices. So the appendices are where you list anything that we request in the project narrative. So if the project narrative asks you to upload your most recent charter school report or an audit or something, those don't count towards your page numbers. You can just stick those at the end in your appendix. But you can also include relevant documents that we don't ask for if you feel like they strengthen your grant application and that they're appropriate for what you're asking. So an example is if you already have reached out and you're working with and have a construction quote already, then you absolutely can upload that as part of your appendix. And anything else that would be helpful, proposed architectural fees, anything that will help show that you have your plan in place. What we don't need is large curriculum documents or kind of generic brochures or something from maybe a vendor you want to work with. Really, the best thing that you can upload here would be anything that would just strengthen your argument for how you use these funds and your ability to use these funds, and that the use of these funds will serve the purpose that you've outlined in your grant project narrative. Anything you put in the appendices, again, does not count towards your 10-page project narrative total. Okay, I'm going to go through how to submit it, and then I know there's a couple questions here, and I'll stop here in a bit. But when you're done with everything, your assurances go into ePlan. It's the related documents general section. There's a link under there. It's one assurance document for both the PPA and for the competitive grant. It covers both. Your budget template. This is located under the related documents competitive section. There's a link for it that you click on and just upload your completed Microsoft Excel budget. And then finally, there's your application document that you need to upload, also found in that related documents competitive section. we asked you put all of it together, your project narrative, your budget narrative, and all of your appendices just as one PDF document. We're going to be getting potentially 100 of these applications. And so if you can just put all that into one document, it'll just make it easier for our reviewers so that we can do that more efficiently for you all. And finally, this is the same deadline as the per pupil budget, 4 p.m. Central Time on, this says Monday, May 20th, but I think that should say Friday. My apologies. Let me confirm that real quick. Yeah, it is Friday, May 20th is the deadline for the competitive application as well. So I'm going to stop there, take questions that you have, and also address questions here in the chat. So let's see here. If we are awarded a fiscal year 22 competitive grant and roll it over into the next year, can we also apply for a fiscal year 23 competitive grant? So I don't have an answer for you yet on that. You can, rolling it over would not prohibit you from applying for additional grant funds in the future. I just don't know if there's going to be any, since we haven't yet started the process for the fiscal year 23 grant funds. I can't speak to if there's going to be anything there that would, restrict who can apply for it based on current grant funds. So rolling it over won't deter you from being able to get a grant. It would just be a situation of if we're trying to make sure that if someone already has a large grant fund, that we would, be potentially prioritizing schools that have not yet accessed that. But per pupil, rolling over per pupil allocations is not an issue for that. We expect, since if you get $500,000, it's highly unlikely that any of you will spend that in this fiscal year. So we're assuming that anyone who gets a competitive grant will be rolling that over. And you actually have until June 30th of 2025 to spend down competitive grant funds. Because again, it's a large number, and we anticipate if you're building a facility, you would need a much longer on-ramp to spend down those funds. If not, will the amounts be the same on both years, or will next year be larger? I'm not sure exactly what you're saying here, but so the per pupil amount for next year and the competitive grants for next year, we haven't determined that yet. What I do know is the total amount for next year that we'll have will be $6 million, and every year after this, according to what's written in statute, is $6 million each fiscal year to be awarded. So we have the ability at the department to determine in that year whether or not it will just be all per pupil allocations, whether or not it will be all competitive or a combination of both. And we haven't yet decided 2023 what that will look like. And so once we know, we'll inform you guys what that will look like. It will be much sooner this year than it was for fiscal 23 than our current year. But it's too early to tell. I can't tell you if what that will look like for next fiscal year yet. Rolling over, yeah. So you can, if you get a competitive grant, they're separate. The PPA and the competitive grant are separate pools of funds. So you can spend down all of your PPA in fiscal year 22 and be done with it, and roll over your competitive funds until 2023. That is totally fine. They are not put together in a single pool if you get both. I have a question on page 6 of the RFP. There are 4 priority areas of funding. Do applicants that meet the higher priority levels have a higher priority for funding by the state? Yes. Great question. So when you start looking at the application and the section specifically on need-based grants, if you look at the questions and that they asked you, how they asked you to fill that out, and then you look at the rubric, you'll notice that there are higher points awarded for higher priority use of funds. So there's 4 priorities. The highest one is immediate needs. So think, severe storm damage, flooding, fire damage to a building, and that needs immediate assistance. Fire code issues, asbestos, anything that would be like an immediate need for health and safety of students and staff. That's going to be a priority 1. The level 2 funds are going to be high need, but maybe not as urgent, but they are still going to be things that impact the health and safety and wellness of staff and students. The level 3 is more focused on those. They might not be immediate health and safety concerns, but they are essential to the overall ability for the school to provide instruction and appropriate learning space for children. Then the level 4 would just be anything else that's facilities related. So any facilities cost is allowable, and you can request any facilities request of funds. But for the need-based, it is tied more to higher needs. So whether that's urgency or making sure that the facility that you have for your children is safe, like immediately, would be the highest priority. So that does matter, and I thank you for asking that question. And the points are awarded in the rubric to favor schools that have a certain percent of their requested funds that meet those higher levels. So it doesn't mean that putting everything in a level 4 means that you won't get funds. It just means that if it's a highly competitive process and not every school is going to get funding, schools that have higher need will be prioritized first. Can a CMO use a per pupil allocation or competitive funds if awarded to support the facility needs of a network office? No, it would need to support the school itself. That would include even if those rooms are in the school building. So if you have a wing that includes office space for your network team, you would not be allowed to use the funds for the network space. It would need to be serving the school space. Very good question. If a CMO is applying competitively for multiple campuses, is it required that they submit one application per campus or combined? You must apply one per campus because it's the school that is applying, the school that is awarded the funds. The CMO is not applying, the CMO is not receiving the funds. You might have someone in network office that's working to fill out the applications, but the funding is going directly to the school, not to the CMO. Again, a really good question. Can you please define what unmet needs means? So any facility need that you have that with your current funding you are not able to address. So for example, it could be something like your school needs new windows for safety or for fire code, or just because they're old and they're not energy efficient. Any of those could be a need that you have, and without the grant you're not able to replace your windows, but with the grant you would be able to replace the windows. That would be an unmet need. So it's really anything that you need additional funds to pay for your facility. What enrollment period was or were used for the per pupil allocation? We used the October 1 enrollment data from fiscal year 22. Also, was membership ADM or ADA used? I'd have to double check. I don't want to give you the wrong answer here, but I can follow up with you, Angela. If a school is refinancing facilities related debt, can it use funds to cover related financing costs? I believe the answer to this is yes. I'll double check for you. Katie, if you want to send that to me in a separate email, just so I remember to get back to you. I believe yes, but let me double check on that for you. What's the per student amount for PPA based on 6 million? What's the per student amount? Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. I could figure it out for you. It was somewhere in the range of 130 to 140 per student. But I could, if you want that exact number, Michelle, you can just shoot me an email. I can get that for you. Are you sure that if we upload one PDF for the assurance budget and application, that ePlan is not going to throw up an error? So to clarify, Angie, I meant one PDF for the project narrative, budget narrative appendix, not assurances or the budget. So thank you for clarifying that if I was unclear. You need to upload an assurances document and the assurances link. You need to upload the budget document and the budget link. And then you need to upload one application with your project narrative, budget narrative, and appendix all together as one PDF. So you're uploading 3 different things. I'm just asking that you don't separate out your project narrative, your budget narrative, and each of your appendix separately. Just put that all together as one for your application submission. I appreciate you clarifying that. We submit if we submit our competitive grant for 500,000, what is the likelihood of being awarded 500,000? I remember the max award wasn't awarded in years past. I wasn't sure how competitive these funds are. That's a really great question because the way we're awarding it is different this year than in years past. So back to the question someone mentioned earlier about whether higher level budget requests will get higher priority in the rubric. We are anticipating that not every school is going to get funds. So we're not spreading the wealth so that everyone who applies for a competitive grant will get something, because everyone's getting a per pupil allocation. So for the competitive portion, we are starting by awarding the amounts requested to the highest scores first, and then working down. So if there are 10 schools that have a perfect score, those 10 schools would receive their full budgets, assuming that all of the requested funds are allowable. And we would fund those grants fully, and then we would move to the next tier of scores. And we would do that process until all the funds have been allocated, so that the schools who had lower scores might not get any funds, or they might get partial funding depending on how the allocations come out. So it is important that you are submitting the highest quality applications possible to make sure you're getting all the rubric points so that you can get your funding. The only instance where this wouldn't be the case is if everyone had a perfect score, then the funds would be allocated differently, obviously, but we're not anticipating that being the case. Even though we're applying as schools, will awards be consolidated if there's a network total? The answer is no. So thank you for clarifying that, Liz. So these are individual school-based amounts that will be in your individual school's ePlan system, and that we're not allowing any consolidation across schools for CMOs. So make sure you're asking for what each school site needs. Okay, a lot of questions, great questions. I appreciate you all. Thank you for helping me clarify these things. Okay, so kind of wrapping up here this first part. In terms of the process itself, here's the timeline. So application window opened this past Monday. The application window closes on Friday, May 20th. So we give you 4 weeks, and I know it's a quick turnaround, y'all. I appreciate you. This was tough for us to roll this out at this point in the year. All schools will hear back about their per pupil allocation budget by June, hopefully early June. And then we'll also hear back about whether or not they receive a competitive grant award in June as well. If you are, for your reimbursement, for your per pupil allocation, as soon as you have an approved budget in ePlan, you can go ahead and submit your reimbursement requests for your per pupil allocation. And then potentially everyone could spend all their PPA money in fiscal year 22 by just going back and getting reimbursed for facilities costs that you've had this year. Otherwise, you'll just submit a FER and roll those funds over into fiscal year 23. For schools that get a competitive grant, once you're awarded the funds, you'll have to go into ePlan and then budget out your awarded funds into the funding application like you did with your per pupil allocations and submit that. And then likely you will roll those over into the next year. Your per pupil allocation funds can be spent up to the end of 2023. Your competitive application funds, you have until 2025, June 30th of 2025 to spend down those funds. So everyone will know the outcome of their competitive grants by June. Everyone should have a approved per pupil allocation budget in ePlan also by early June. In terms of the application process, how these are reviewed, each application is scored by 3 individuals who will be trained and normed on how to use the rubric. And then those scores are averaged. Each school needs to score at least 75% of the available points in order to qualify for a grant. Any school that has at least 75% of the points will be considered, but funds will be awarded to the applicants with the highest scores first, per the question that I answered before. So funding is then not guaranteed for every applicant for the competitive pool because everyone received those per pupil allocations amounts. This is an image from your application that shows the available signed points. Cover page, signed assurances, and the appendix are required but don't award any points. So all of your points are going to be in your project narrative. So 4 points for the project overview, that part 1 that everyone fills out, 12 points, so the majority of your points in the grant specific narrative, and then finally 8 points for your budget and the budget narrative that you submit. The rubric that we are using is in the application under Appendix Attachment A. And so you can use that, and I hope you do use that as you go through and double check your application before submission. So here's an example from the project overview section, which you can get a total of 4 points. So you can see what we are looking for to award a 4, a 3, all the way down to 0. Once the applications have all been reviewed, again, we will announce recipients of the competitive grant in June. And then there will be a grant award notification letter that comes out with that. And I will also have an additional, probably much shorter webinar to go over what you need to do next. So submitting your budgets in ePlan and anything else that is specific to those of you who received competitive grant funds. So to recap, all schools that are currently in operation in fiscal year 22, so you have enrollment this year, received a per pupil allocation that is currently available in ePlan. The budget, we are asking that you submit for your per pupil allocation by May 20th. And in order to receive your per pupil allocation, you need an approved budget as well as assigned assurances uploaded in ePlan. This deadline is, if this deadline is not as hard as the other deadline, if you need feedback on your per pupil allocation, if I had to push it back to you to make a change or anything, you won't lose your per pupil allocation. Everyone will be able to spend out their per pupil allocation. Schools can apply for additional competitive funds in ePlan up to $500,000 per school. Those additional application materials are also due in ePlan by 4 p.m. on May 20th. Both of these pools of funds, the PPA and the competitive, you can reimburse facilities costs all the way back to July 1st, 2021. And just a reminder, when we say something is submitted in ePlan, that means that the status should say LEA authorized representative approved. So the grant director submits it, they hit draft completed, then the LEA fiscal representative, they approve it, and then the LEA authorized representative has to approve it. So there's 3 steps. Sometimes it's the same person doing one or more of those, but all 3 of those needs to be completed by the 20th. So do make sure if you are the grant director and you submit it, you follow up with the LEA fiscal rep and the LEA authorized rep to make sure that they are also submitting it in time. I would also say to all of you to make sure that you're checking the address book for who those people are, that they're currently filled spots. And I would ask them to go ahead and make sure they can log into ePlan this week, because we have had situations where folks who don't log into ePlan as often, when they finally do need to log in, they've forgotten what their login is or they have troubles getting in. So I would have everyone test this week that everyone can access it, just to avoid any kind of frantic last minute on May 18th, May 19th, trying to reach out to ePlan help desk to help someone get logged in. So that would be my advice to you all. But I'm going to stop again and see what questions we have here. Okay. Who is typically on the review panel for these grants? It's required that they are TDOE employees. So they're all going to be internal TDOE employees. They're going to be staff from the division of choice. They're going to be also potentially from federal programs at the FPO office. So people who have more knowledge of charter schools or of grants. If we had an enrollment amendment in fiscal year 20, would we still qualify for the expansion, or how recent would the amendment need to be to qualify? So the amendment would need to be, so if you've already made the adjustments based on the amendment, then you would not qualify. It would be the same thing as if like your school opened this year, like I know you just opened, but you would not qualify to open up to apply for the expansion grant. So in the same way, if you've already done the expansion, then that would not qualify. However, if you in your charter agreement amendment, you said by 2023 we're going to add a grade level, then potentially that could qualify. So I recommend if you're not sure, just shoot me an email and ask, and I can help clarify that. For debt service, what specific costs are eligible for reimbursement? Debt service for facilities-related costs and capital outlay projects. So I can provide more information if you want to email me if you have a specific question, but it all has to be tied to those allowable facilities-related costs or capital outlay projects. Can you share some examples of expenditures for the per pupil allocation? Sure. So the ones that we had that were the most common in prior years was lease and mortgage payments. So a lot of people just went back and got reimbursed for their lease from the previous months, and that's totally fine. So that's an easy one that if you want to just go ahead and upload your lease document or your mortgage document, the payments that you're going to ask for reimbursement, and then prove that you paid them all, then that's an easy way for you to get reimbursed for those funds. But it could also be for any other facilities projects that you did this year or would like to do next year. So if you need to replace a boiler or insert, or you want a security system, or try to think of other things. If you need to upgrade your kitchen for your school to feed your students, ADA compliance, anything that you're making improvements to your building, have already done this year or would like to do next year, your per pupil allocation could cover any of that. How many entities will be eligible? Is there a set number? So there's no set number. It's just until we allocate all the funds. So it is unlikely that everyone who applies will get a competitive grant. If every school in Tennessee, if a charter school applies and asks for $500,000, there's not enough for everyone to get something. So there's no set number of schools. Everyone is eligible to get something. But again, it's likely that it will be, I don't have a set number, but my assumption is if everyone's asking for the highest amount, there'll probably be between 30 to 40 schools that get some sort of competitive fund. If people were asking for smaller amounts, then there might be additional schools that would get it, but there's no cap for the competitive grant. Is there any interplay we need to be mindful of with BEP capital payments? So, meaning like you don't want to make sure that you're not being reimbursed for something that was already paid by BEP. Katie, go ahead and email me that question because I'm not exactly sure what you're asking and I want to follow up on it. But you are able to be reimbursed for anything that the school paid for that was facilities related. But go ahead and email me your question so I can follow up on that specifically. If we have multiple issues that fall into multiple priority levels that will total less than $500,000, will those issues be judged for separate priority levels? So if you have multiple projects that you're working on, great question, Dan. And let's say you have $100,000 for damage that was caused by a tornado, and you have $100,000 for debt service, $100,000 for ADA compliance. So if you're splitting it up, what you'll do in your application is one of the questions asks you to actually assign each line item which level it is and come up with a percent. So you're going to calculate that for us and show what percent is level 1, what percent is level 2, what percent is level 3. Then if you look at the rubric has kind of a sliding scale to get a 4, then obviously a larger percent of your funds would be in those level 1, level 2. If 100% of your funds are level 4, then you would be lower priority for the need-based. But that's how it works. So it's kind of the way that we assess it is kind of proportional to the amount of grant funds that you are going to put into each of those buckets. Based on your past experience, what expenditures are not eligible but requested by schools? That's a great question. I would say, so don't ask for funds for non-school spaces, so network offices, like repaving parking lots and, doing landscaping, things that aren't really essential to safety, health, or learning would be things that I would not request. What else? Make sure that the costs have to be within the grant period. So if you put in your budget something that was from before July 1st, that would not be funded. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. That because these are state-related funds, it's much broader. Like we're able to kind of have a broader scope of what we can approve. I know for those of you who work with me on federal funds, it's much more strict. So for this one, as long as there's a clear connection to facilities and it's helping student health, safety, or learning, then that's going to be something that's allowable. So lease and mortgage are allowed because you have to have the facility to provide learning for children. But if you're looking to upgrade things that aren't really essential, or you can't prove that they are really essential or in those higher level tiers, those would probably mean that you would just result in a lower overall score, but not necessarily prohibit you from being awarded funds. So something to consider is you can request $500,000, and some of those funds will be level 1 and some will be level 4. And that could potentially reduce your overall rubric score versus you have $250,000 worth of level 1 spending. You could submit a request just for what you need for higher prioritized funds. Could be something that you choose to do if you're concerned about what's going to be approved and what's not going to be approved. You're welcome. Let's see here. I hope I'm not asking what's already been answered, but one PPA REIM reimbursement docs have been submitted. What's the projected turnaround to receive the funds? Great question. So reimbursement process typically takes, usually takes about 4 weeks. So when you submit a reimbursement in ePlan, usually, not right now because I'm juggling 2 jobs, but usually I review those within about a week, and then it goes to our finance team, and they take, I think, 10 to 14 days is the average turnaround time for them to approve it, and then it goes to Edison for payment, and that happens within another week or so. So I would say on average 4 to 6 weeks from when you submit it to when you will get the payment back. That being said, right now I'm behind on all ePlan related items, so I apologize for those of you who are waiting on CSP and gear approvals, but I'm budgeting time to do that tomorrow. But right now things are a little slower, and then also the turnaround time is slower for reimbursements that you submit basically at the end of June or the beginning of July, because at that point there's also FERS, and every school, every LEA in the state is closing down their grants, so there might be a longer lag time for anything that you're submitting in June. But when you're rolling over funds, you're starting next year out, typically 4 to 6 week turnaround is what you should expect. For new school starting in fall 2022, can we request funds for construction projects that will begin this fall for the competitive grant? Yes. So for the competitive grant, you can request funds as far back as July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2025. So as long as your project will take place and be completed within that time frame, you can request any funds to be reimbursed for that time period. Do we have to show evidence of compliance with Davis-Bacon Act for construction projects? So not for the purposes of the application, but yes, in terms of you'll need to comply with that, but we're not asking for that as part of the application process. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and skip our question here. You guys have asked so many good questions, and I just want to make sure that we're moving along for everyone's time here. If you were going to log off at this time, we've gone over the fiscal year 22 application review. If you're going to log off because you're not going to stick around for the ePlan walkthrough, I would just ask if you could please go ahead and before you leave, complete this survey for me. You can. Let me see, I dropped it in the chat earlier. Let me see if I can get it for you and reshare it. You can also just use your phone camera to scan that QR code and submit that survey for me. We do get this data a couple weeks after we present, and I always take a look at it to hopefully improve my webinars for you all. So if you can go ahead and do that for me. If you're sticking around for the ePlan walkthrough, then I'm also going to give you an opportunity to complete the survey at the end of that as well. So here is the link in the chat box. And then, or you can scan using your phone the QR code. So while those of you who are signing off are doing that, just a reminder, here's my contact information. My email and phone number remains the same despite my new roles, so you can still use that same cell phone number and email address. And please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or concerns you have about this application process or the PPA. So I'm going to go ahead and continue moving forward. And I know some of you might need to drop off. That's totally fine. I'm going to upload the recording and share out the PowerPoint slides after this. So you can always access that as you need to walk through ePlan stuff. And thank you all so much. I appreciate it. I'm sad that I won't be doing as much directly with charter schools here once we hire the new director of charter schools, but I'll still be here. I'll still be working with you all. And I'm truly honored to work in this role to support all the work that you guys are doing in your schools across the state. I was a middle school principal of a charter school in Columbus, Ohio, for a few years, and I just know the challenge of the work, especially right now during the pandemic. That's something that I never had to do. So just thank you to all of you and your teachers and everyone, and for all the hard work that you do each and every day. I'm excited that we're finally getting to roll out these funds for you, and just want to make sure that everyone is able to access their funds and use it, because I know it's going to be really helpful for all of you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shift now to the ePlan walkthrough. And again, if you need to sign off, I will be sharing this out so someone can use this later on. So just a reminder that you need to make sure you can log into ePlan. Make sure that you log into ePlan. And if you do not have a login, the process to get that is by reaching out to SSO support. There's an email and a phone number that is listed here. The DT support does not help with ePlan issues. They just deal with the login issues. That phone number is for them. So if you can't log in or you forgot your SSO account, those are the folks that will help you with that process. If you have ePlan user access emails, then you will use the form that I shared before, as well as the ePlan help email address. So there's two separate problems here and two separate people who can help you solve each of those issues. I do recommend, again, checking this week that everyone that you need has their access and can log in, just to avoid figuring this out at the last minute. I would hate for that to prevent anyone from submitting their application on time. Here's the form. We already went over this, so I'll just go ahead and remind you that this is the form you need to submit to make sure everyone has the access to ePlan that they require. Okay, so this is the part where I'm going to walk through and show you exactly how to submit your budget for your ePlan per pupil allocations. Yes, the CSP PowerPoint, Amber is going to share that out for you. So that for those of you who were on the PowerPoint a couple weeks ago for the CSP monitoring, Amber should be sharing out those slides. Okay, so for the per pupil allocations, this is your ePlan homepage. The left kind of lighter blue is the menu. And when you hover over those arrows, it's going to draw out additional options. So here you'll hover over funding and then over funding applications. And when you click that funding applications, then it's going to take you to this page. This is the home page for all of your funding applications that are active. So some of you might not have any. You might just have your state funds and then this fiscal year 22 charter schools. Some of you may have GEAR or CSP or other ones listed here, depending on what your school currently has.
Excuse me, Nathan.
Yes.
Are you sharing your screen?
It is.
I only have your contact information slide up.
Interesting. Something happened here. I'm going to stop sharing the resharing because it's my computer's telling me that I'm sharing, so something happened here. 1 second. Are you able to see it
visible now? It was visible to some of us at first, so
that's so weird.
But well, I can see it now.
I see it now. Thank you.
Thank you for stopping me because I would have just kept going. So, so let me. Here we go. Okay, so this is the page I was sharing where hover over funding, click on funding applications right there. That will take you to this page. This page lists all of your funding applications. So you might just have state funds and then this charter schools facility grant, but others may appear here as well. This is the link that you'll click on for your per pupil allocations and for your competitive grant application. But also make sure that this box right here is checked that you have selected 2022 for the funding application for the charter schools facility grant to appear. As an FYI, you can always click on that and go back in time and click on previous years if you want to see previous grants that you've submitted. But for the purpose of a facilities grant, make sure it's 2022. So when you click on the fiscal year 22 charter schools facility application link, it will take you to this page, which is the home page for the facilities grant. So a couple things to note here. At the top, it's going to list your school name. Thank you, Aero Academy, for letting me use this screen. So Aero Academy is the name of the school, and then parentheses, that is the ID number that we ask for. When we ask your ePlan ID number, it's that. So CS stands for charter schools. The middle number 792, that is your LA or your district. So 792 is Shelby County, and then the 8150 is the school number. All charter schools, with the exception of I think 3, are an 8000 number. So that's how we know which school specifically you are, and that's where you can find it. Below that is your application status. It is going to tell you that first part where it says application status. It's telling you what status is your application in currently, and that will determine what you're able to do. So if it says not started, then you can't edit anything in it. Similarly, once you have an approved application, you can't edit it. So you have to change the status for approval, and you have to change the status to make revisions. That second item there with the orange box around it, that is how you move ePlan to a different status. It's always going to offer to you the next status you can change it to. So in this case, the screenshot, the application is currently in draft started phase. So the next thing you can change it to is draft completed. That is a link. And when you click on it, it will basically ask you to confirm that that's what you want to do. And that's how you move it along the process. Also, as a side note, when you hover over that link, it will list the names of the people who are able to make that change into ePlan. So once you are ready to submit draft completed, if you hover over it, it's going to tell you the name of your grant director, most likely is who's able to do that, or whoever you gave that access to. So make sure that you have changed your status to draft started so that you can begin working on your application. This is what we call the sections page. It lists all the components of your funding application for the facilities grant. So most of you are probably familiar with these pieces, but just as a recap, the history log automatically records anytime you make a change to the status in ePlan. So anytime you change it from not started to started, to completed, to LEA, fiscal approved, anytime you click on those and change the status, then it's logging it with a time and a date stamp in this history log. But you can also add to this log by clicking on create comment, and you can add additional information or context. So sometimes we use this to communicate back and forth. Usually we use this for the reimbursements. So when I deny a reimbursement for whatever reason, I'll go to the history log and I'll create a comment to tell you why I denied it, what you need to fix. And that's how you know what to do. You can also always email me. It's a little easier. Just sometimes I can give you those comments right there and they're preserved for you in the history log. The next section is allocation. So I know there's a question here earlier, but this is where for any grant you can determine how much you received by the allocations link there. And then also on this section is the cover page section that I also mentioned before. So when you click on the allocations link, it's going to bring you to this page, and this shows you your allocations for both the per pupil grant as well as the competitive grant. So the per pupil amount should already be showing. If you are not open this year, then it would say 0 because you don't have any current enrollment. But for everyone else who has current enrollment, it will have your calculated amount. This is just an example. So I had ePlan give me these numbers so I could play around in it and make sure everything works. So don't be alarmed that this school has a competitive application because this is just the test site. But this is where you'll see your per pupil amount. For everyone currently, the charter school competitive section number 2 should say is 0. If you were awarded a competitive grant, then we will upload those allocations later, and then you'll have a new total that combines your per pupil and your competitive amount. The cover page is the second link in that section, and this is what it looks like. And again, we talked about this already, but do make sure you complete this in full. I just want to draw your attention to this box where it's asking you to check if you're just going to claim your per pupil amount, or if you're also going to apply for the competitive grant. When you click on competitive, it just gives you a reminder that there are additional documents that you are responsible for uploading. And part of this is because, you know, it's a little wonky to have these two grants in the same application, so both the per pupil amount and the competitive. So I know in order to allow people to submit without any issues, we just kind of added this section so that you can let us know that you're applying for the competitive grant, remind you that you need to submit everything, and still submit your application without any issues. So it's kind of a reminder to you all what you need to complete to be considered for the competitive funds. The other thing I want to highlight on this page is there's a section that says DUNS number and then UEI number. So some of you might be aware of this shift, but the federal government transitioned from using DUNS to UEI on April 4th of this year. So for grants that kind of straddle this period, we're asking that you upload both. If you have any questions about this, I included there the link. It's that sam.gov, and they have a whole section that talks about this transition and what your school needs to know. If you're having issues with this, let me know, but as long as you have one of those filled out, I will consider your application complete. So if you don't know what your UEI number is, at least submit your DUNS number. We'll go back and we'll help you figure it out so that you have both those numbers available, but at least have one of those filled out. If you can, include both. So once you're in the draft started phase, you can begin working on creating your budget for your per pupil allocation. Again, you're not going to be doing this step right now for competitive. This will come later. But there are 2 links under your per pupil allocation page. It's the budget and the budget overview. The budget overview just lists all of the available account numbers and line item numbers. We created a template for that, which is attachment B in the application. We also created the budget for the competitive funds where you can see them all listed out too. But if you're curious just what are the line items and account numbers that I can use, that's where you can find them, the budget overview. The budget link is what you want to click on to actually start building out your budget that you want to use for your per pupil allocation. So when you click on that, it will take you here. And this is showing you the 4 account numbers that you have and can use as part of your facilities fund. So maintenance of plant, regular capital outlay, principal, and interest. So you can click on that modify button next to each of these and then create line items that will then help you spin down all of your allocation that you see here on this page. So what you're looking for to be completed is that remaining number that currently says $100,000. It needs to be 0, and then you'll be ready to submit it. When you click on the modify link here, it will take you to this page, which is where you add your line items. And so what you'll do is you'll click on that add budget detail. Right now, this budget has no line items added to it. But when you click on this add budget detail, it will take you to a page where you can then fill out all the information to add a line item. Because we clicked on the maintenance of plant modify button, it will automatically have your account number set at that 72620 maintenance of plants number. But you can actually change it if you need be by hitting that drop-down menu. Then from the drop-down menu next to the line item, you'll select the line item that makes most sense for what you want to request here in the narrative description. Your location code should automatically populate to your school. And then what we need from you is to fill out the quantity, the cost, and then the narrative description. So most of you will probably, since these are facilities funds and you're not buying, 100 computers or something, most of your quantities will probably say 1, and then you'll just put your total line item cost there, and it will automatically calculate that budget detailed total in gray. But if it makes sense for your line item that you are going to include a different quantity, you can enter in the quantity and then the base unit price, and it will automatically, again, create your budget detailed total. So the example that I used here is, if I'm just going to use my PPA to pay down my lease payments, then I would say we are using our funds to pay 2 months, excuse my typo, of current lease agreement. My quantities, I'm paying 2 months. The cost per unit is $10,000 per month. So then 2 months times 10,000 a month equals 20,000 total. So that would be kind of like the narrative description that checks all the boxes. You explain the purpose, you show the breakdown of quantity and cost, do the math, show me how you got it. This is a pretty simple example. This usually is more complicated when you're doing larger grants and buying many things, but the point here is to include enough information for the reviewer to for me, the reviewer, to determine that it is an allowable use of funds, and that the amount you're requesting is reasonable, and it makes sense. So breaking down the math for me is always, it just is, I know, like, got it. I know exactly what they're spending their money on. It's allowable. So once you have filled out that section, you hit the create button at the bottom, and then that will add this line item back on this page here. So what you'll start seeing is this will start populating with every line item that you add, and you keep doing that until your remaining number on this page remaining is 0. So you get to that point once you've added all of your individual line items in each of these accounts to budget all of your allocated funds. You do not have to use all the account numbers. So you might just put all of it into maintenance of plant or all of it into principal or whatever, and that's fine. But you have these at your disposal. Next, we're going to skip the competitive section right now. For your per pupil allocation, you've budgeted out everything. You've completed your cover page. The last thing you need to do is to upload the signed assurance document. So you'll click on this button, Related Documents General. It'll take you here. This is both where you download the assurances linked there, and then also once you've signed those assurances, you'll be able to upload it on the link that appears to the right. It's not showing on my screen, but there's a link there that you should be able to upload those assurances. Again, you just upload the one assurances for both the competitive and the per pupil. We already talked about this, but this is the assurance document that you'll see. There's a cover page, then there's a number of pages that list out all the assurances. And then the last page, which I believe is 13, is where you'll fill out and sign and date that. Then you'll upload this document back in that link that I just showed you. The final thing that I want to point you to is the grant checklist. You don't do anything with this, but this is how I communicate back and forth with you when we're going through the approval process or revision process. So if you click on this link, you can see what I'm checking for when I'm approving budgets. So for here, I'm checking, is your cover page complete in full? For your budget, have you allocated everything so that there's only $0 left remaining? Is each line item detailed enough so that I know that it's allowable? The budgeted line items are placed in appropriate categories. So I will give you a caveat that that's not necessary for the per pupil. So that number 3 underneath budgets only necessary for if you get a competitive fund. So I'll explain that to folks later on. And then as each line item, do they include a narrative with sufficient detail that explains how the use of the funds is going to be used to support their facility needs? Then the rest of the things listed there are just, did you upload the documents that are required? So your for the competitive grant, did you upload your application narrative? Did you upload your budget template? And then for both grants, did you upload your assurance document? When I'm reviewing this, I will check on those boxes and change it to basically, yes, I have it, it's complete. And I have to do that for all of these before I can approve it. If there is an issue with any of these sections, then I'll tag it as attention needed. When I do that, it creates a text box and I enter in specific notes to help clarify what I need. So for the budget, for example, if 90% of your line items are fine, then I will list the line items that are in question and give you specific feedback, such as, please provide a per unit cost for this item, or please provide more detail to determine the allowability of this cost. So I'll put that in there. And then when I kick this back to you in ePlan, then you can pull up the checklist and see my notes and determine what you need to do to have that section approved. So this is where I communicate with you on completing your budget and in ePlan. For the per pupil allocation, if this is what I mentioned before, that if for some reason you need to fix something and it's after 5/20, do not worry about that. That's just when I would like initial budgets submitted to me by. If I need to go back and provide you feedback, you will not lose your per pupil allocation. With a competitive grant, you can submit everything, and if there's something missing, like you're missing the cover page, if you're missing your budget template, you can upload your application, and it's after 5/20, then at that point, you would not be eligible to be considered for the application. So it's more important to make sure that all of your pieces for your competitive application are here and uploaded on time. Okay, so I'll wrap up by just explaining how you make sure that everything is submitted and good to go. So once you've completed everything and you've done your per pupil budget and you've uploaded all of the documents for your competitive sections and you're ready to submit it, then the first step is that the facilities grant director will click on the link to change status from draft started to draft completed. So you'll click on this link up here. Again, if you hover over that link, it will tell you who can do that, and it'll take you to this page. ePlan is going to check for any validation errors. So what will happen is there are some things that will trigger ePlan to say, hey, there's an error here, and it will give you a link to go to the page. You need to fix it. That's its way of helping you find issues before you submit it. If it says no validation errors were found, then you can go ahead and click confirm and you're good to go. One flag that I want to make very clear is because some people are going to be applying for the per pupil grant and not the competitive grant, it is possible to submit your application and potentially have forgotten to upload something on your competitive grant. So ePlan may not flag for you that your budget document or your application are not uploaded. So you have to make sure that you double check that those things are complete, because otherwise folks would not be able to submit their per pupil allocations. So that is why that issue exists. So the validation errors are helpful, but it's not foolproof. So just make sure you do your due diligence and double check that everything is uploaded. Once you click confirm, then it will go ahead and move it up the ladder to the next reviewer. At this point, it is your application status will say draft completed, and now it's the LEA fiscal representative's turn to do their review. So they have two options. They can either click approved or not approved. If they click not approved, it will return the ePlan status to I believe draft started or back to not started, and so the grants director will need to go back in there and make whatever changes they need to make. So for example, if you've submitted it and then you realized, oh no, I didn't actually upload my application, then just let the LEA fiscal representative know and they can kick it back to you. If they click approve, then it will go ahead and take you again to a similar page, check for validation errors, and then the LEA fiscal rep will again click confirm. And then there's one more step, and this is why, I always feel bad when people are like, where's my application? I thought I submitted it. It's because there's 3 steps that the school has to do before it comes to me. And so the last step is that the LEA authorized representative has to approve it. So similarly, if the LEA authorized rep says not approved, it will kick it all the way back to the beginning to your grants director to make any changes. But should they determine everything's ready to go and they click approved, here, it will take them to the final page. So they have an additional step where they both have to click the confirm button, but they also have to check this box that acknowledges here that the information submitted is accurate and complete, and the charter school representatives understand and agree to and abide to all the assurances attached to the application. So it's just one more kind of box they have to check. And once they've done that, then it's going to say LEA authorized representative approved, and you know that it's been submitted for our review. Some things that I want to flag, some issues that come up for some folks, is the confusion around whether or not your application's been submitted. It's because sometimes a person may hold the rights to more than one ePlan role. So this doesn't happen for LEAs for districts. They're massive. They have multiple peoples who fill these very specific roles. But for some of our charter schools, especially those without a CMO, you might have one person who's doing 2 or all 3 of these positions. And so they might click on the link and not remember that they also have to go back and click it again if they hold a different user role. So that is one thing I want to flag, just to make sure, especially if you know your CEO is both the LA fiscal rep and the LA authorized rep. As the grant director, just make sure that you are doing your due diligence and reminding them that they need to submit this before the deadline. And then just a reminder of tip, you can click on your address book on the blue menu on the left if you're not sure who needs to do the next step. You can also hover over that change status to link, and it will always tell you who is the person who can do the next step. So it will tell you who your LA fiscal rep is or your LA authorized rep if you hover over it. So here is just the recap of all the steps we just went over. So this can be a good checklist for whoever you are having complete your application for you. So first, just view what your allocations are in ePlan. Complete the cover page underneath the allocations title. Click the budget link in fiscal year 22 Charter Schools Facilities Grant per pupil and begin to allocate all of your funds there. Download the assurances document underneath related documents general, and then complete and upload the signed assurances document in that same spot. Finally, you submit your funding application ePlan to be reviewed and approved by the grant director, LA fiscal rep, and LA authorized representative. All that should be completed by Friday, May 20th. I want to flag for you that you don't want to submit it until you've also done your competitive grant pieces if you're also applying for competitive funds. So stop there. Do I have any questions on submitting your per pupil allocation amounts? The recording will be sent as soon as I can get it approved. We have to submit our recordings and they turn it into a YouTube link, which I can then share out. So it might take a couple days for that to be shared out. Is there a time frame for LEA authorized representative approval? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but if you're asking, so the status needs to be LA authorized representative approved by the deadline by Friday, May 20th. If you're asking how long it will be before it is reviewed and approved by the department, for the per pupil budget allocations, it will probably take about 2 weeks for those to all be reviewed and sent back to you. For the competitive grant applications, it will take a little longer. It'll take about 3 or 4 weeks for us to process the applications and announce the grant awards.
Nathan, that was my question, and I think you answered. So before it gets to you, it has to be approved by the LEA representative.
Correct.
So in order for it to be timely, then we need the LEA's approval before May 20th.
So let me clarify. I think I get the question here. When it says LEA authorized representative approved, that's going to be an internal person to your charter school. So it says LEA because ePlan was built with districts in mind and not individual charter schools. But your LEA authorized representative is likely your CFO or your CEO of your charter school. They need to be the ones who approve it. So it does not go to your district for approval. It would be your internal charter school folks who are working on this.
Got it. That's me.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
I need to approve what I'm doing. Thank
It
you.
is confusing because again, charter schools were not always at the forefront when they're making these titles of things. So, yes, LA fiscal representative is just whoever your charter school has determined that is, and it's likely the CEO or the executive director of your school or CMO. Okay, last section here. We're almost done here, but For the competitive grant application, you basically just follow all the same steps as we went over for your per pupil allocation. But I just want to flag and reiterate a couple things. So one, a reminder that your allocations for your competitive grant here will say 0. So don't be alarmed. They will say 0. And then once you're awarded additional grants, then we will upload in the ePlan, and then you will be able to go back and budget out those funds. Two, because again, you're going to budget the funds in ePlan later, you won't use the budget link for the competitive grant in this first process. Instead, you're going to click on the related documents section there, and you're going to download your budget template here. So this is the way that we kind of work around not being able to submit a budget in ePlan without an allocation. We created an Excel document here. You will enter in your school name, enter in each line item amount, and then your budget narrative description there. And then it will go ahead and calculate it for you in yellow. Make sure that your requested amount does not exceed the maximum grant amount of $500,000. You'll then upload that template back into ePlan right here where it says upload new. This is also where you will upload your completed competitive application. It says in A under document template because there's no template for this. Just use the application document we shared and create your 10-page application with your project narrative and your budget narrative and any appendices that you want to attach. In addition, just as a reminder, to be considered completed, your cover page needs to be fully complete here, as well as the insurance and the assurance pages, and you need to have signed assurances uploaded. You all are doing that for your PPA, so you should be fine. But I just want to reiterate that if those things are incomplete, then your competitive grant would be considered incomplete, would not be considered. Your per pupil allocation, we would just kick it back to you and ask you to upload it before we would approve your per pupil allocation budget. So again, here's the assurance document that you will upload. These are your cover pages. So the one that's in ePlans on the right, and then the one that's attached to assurances on the left. You are going to go into ePlan and download the assurance document here and upload it here. One document for both the competitive and the per pupil. And again, it's the same submission as before with your per pupil, that it needs to say LEA authorized representative approved by the deadline to be considered complete. And if your school is awarded a competitive grant, at that point, we will ask you to go back into ePlan, submit your budget for approval there, and we'll provide additional guidance for that, as well as a webinar if and when that occurs. So your competitive application steps, again, are completing the cover plan underneath allocations in ePlan, downloading the assurances under the related documents general section in ePlan, completing and then uploading those signed assurances in ePlan, uploading your competitive application as one PDF document that includes your project narrative, budget narrative, and any appendices that you need, and then uploading that into the related documents competitive page. And then finally uploading your completed budget template, that Excel document that I showed you, to the related documents competitive page. Those are your steps to make sure that you have everything done for your competitive application to be considered, and just make sure your application status says LEA authorized representative approved by Friday, May 20th. Okay, that is the end of the walkthrough here for ePlan. Are there any additional questions that you all have that I can answer before we sign off today? If you're still with me and you have not yet filled out the survey, I would love for you to take some time to do that for me, please. I dropped the link in the comment section you can click on, or you can scan the QR code, and that will take you to the form that you can fill out. As always, I really appreciate the feedback and hope to take that feedback and implement it for future sessions with you all so I can be a better service and communicate things better. That is the end of our session. I'm going to leave this up for folks who need to access it. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, additionally, I can hang around for a couple more minutes, but also you have my email address, you have my cell phone number. Happy to help when I can. Hi, Angie. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.